Nice. Hi, and welcome to Wave Reviews Book Club's Eye on the Book Show, another addition to our Rave Waves lineup. I'm your host, Rox Berkey, broadcasting live from Dallas, Texas. Before we get started, I'd like to share a bit of useful information. During our Rave Wave shows, we promote our member books via recorded commercials. If you would like to know how to get your own commercial to air during one of our shows, just visit Rave Waves tab on the RRBC website for all the details. It's a fantastic way to promote your books. I'm honored today to welcome to the show RISA author Dennis Cardiff from Ottawa, Canada. Welcome.
Thank you, Rox. Sorry.
Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for Dennis, I'll be opening up the floor for those questions and comments throughout the show. Your mics will remain muted until we open the floor. We ask that you please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. At that time, your mic will be unmuted. You may also access the chat function located at the bottom of your screen to type your questions or comments to us. Again, welcome, Dennis, and thank you for joining us today. We're so glad to finally get you on the show to share your story. Your books seem so interesting.
Well, thank you, Rox. It was a very interesting time, very interesting people, and I certainly learned a lot, made some very good friends who sadly I don't see anymore because I've retired. I don't go down to the center of the city, and unfortunately, even before I stopped going downtown, a lot of them had died, and others had lost interest because their friends had died. They had no one to talk to.
That is so sad. I want to introduce those that are watching and listening to the real Dennis, the gentleman away from the keyboard and away from the palette. So tell us about.
Go ahead.
Tell us about yourself.
I was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I lived for 5 years in Toronto, and I've lived in Ottawa for I think about 40 years now.
Wow.
I don't know if those add up, but I was a professional portrait painter from 1972 till about I guess probably 2010, and then my eyes started getting bad, and I had back problems. I couldn't stand for long periods of time, so that's when I got into to writing. I belonged to a few different book clubs. Writing.com was the first, and they had regular contests, and I got very interested in those. Won quite a few ribbons, no cash prizes or anything like that.
Hey, acknowledgement's good.
Oh yeah, certainly. And then I started a website on WordPress.com, which was free. It's still free. And that was about the time that I met when I started talking to the homeless people. My brother-in-law was working with a homeless shelter, and I asked him about it, and I thought that would be something that I'd enjoy. He invited me over for a walk around, and I met some of the residents there, and they were anxious that I come back and play chess with them. I applied to the organization and took a food handling course, and I was on call because I worked until 6 o'clock every night, so I was late for the 5 to 9 shift, so I was often called in on Saturday and Sunday. And usually my job was to wash dishes. They had a huge commercial washer, and occasionally I'd be wiping tables or collecting trays. And the people seemed just so genuine, so very nice. Actually, nicer than the people I worked with on a full-time basis.
So Dennis, was that in 2010 that you actually got involved with them and started in that kind of a capacity?
Yes. the fall of 2010. And then I met Joy about probably a month later. And I wondered why she was sitting on the sidewalk in the cold weather when she could have come to our shelter and had a hot meal. And she said, I don't go to those places. I don't feel comfortable. She was agoraphobic, so that was part of the problem. And she'd had bad experiences, and she said, you never know who you're going to sit beside and if they're going to bother you. So I got a different viewpoint from then on. And it was a year later that I suggested to her that I'd like to write a book, and asked if she would introduce me to her friends, which she did. And every noon hour, I'd go to a nearby park. It was about a block from where I worked, and would meet anywhere from 6 to 20 people from the streets that would gather. We'd usually bring beer and smoke a joint and just chat. Very nice people. I never met anybody that I didn't like, although there were some very rough people who'd had been in jail for murder, who'd served 25 years for murder, but it didn't show when they were chatting. They were just laughing and carrying on with the rest of us. My first introduction to them.
I'm sorry. So the book that we're actually going to talk about is that first book that you started with Joy.
Yes.
Find a Home, Conversations with Street People. And you did mention that, homeless and street people, what's the right term? How should these people be referred to?
It all depends on the people themselves. Some homeless people are never on the street. They're never begging for money. They just continue on as best they can. Other people panhandle on the streets, and that's the difference that I see. Sometimes street people do have homes. Sometimes they don't. They get kicked out of places. It's called couch surfing. Sleep one place one night, one place another night. The government tries to find homes for them, and that will sometimes work out and sometimes not. But
so I know you mentioned that you're not as front and center in visiting the homeless as you were when you started writing the book and books that are in the series. But I kind of would like your opinion based on the coronavirus pandemic. Incomes have diminished and more people may be finding themselves homeless. How can sharing their personal challenges help or make a difference in your opinion?
I think people are going to relate to other people that are having these problems, and probably to a greater extent. I've read a lot about Skid Row in Los Angeles and the problems they have down there. In Ottawa, it's not nearly as bad, of course. But I found it just very interesting talking to these people as individuals. They all had their own stories to tell. And they liked talking to me because I hadn't heard stories. Everybody else around them had, and was tired of them. But I just got into a habit of, when I'd get back to work at noon, I'd write down what we'd been talking about, and this just continued on for a couple of years. And then I was approached by a publisher who offered to produce my first book, and that went very well. It was actually, I worked for a law firm, and people were quite supportive, even though they'd sometimes walk past me on the sidewalk and, sitting with Joy, and wouldn't acknowledge me, wouldn't acknowledge her. And sometimes I'd hear about that, sometimes I wouldn't. But it's a very strange experience to look up at the world from the sidewalk and just see what kind of a reception you get. And Joy tended to be rather outspoken, and I can remember one of our employees walked past her and Joy said, "Sweetie, you could use a bit more tan." And the woman turned around and says, "Well, thank you for the fashion advice. I'll take that. I'll take that to heart." So you never knew what was going to happen. And she tended to, she drank sherry, watered down, because she couldn't drink it straight.
Yeah.
She had a lot of health concerns.
So Dennis, I'm gonna take a glance into the peanut gallery because we've got some interesting comments and questions that I kind of like to bring to light. We have a comment early on the cover of this book, Gotta Find a Home, Conversations with Street People. I believe that you actually drew that cover, and there's a question: are you standing on that cover? Is that?
Yeah. And my wife is sitting with me. And that was it was actually from a photograph taken in our driveway at our house. I wasn't allowed to photograph any of the people on the streets due to privacy concerns, and even in my book, I wasn't allowed to mention specific locations. I know I do give street names and things like that, but they're all made up. It's strange when you think of homeless people, how their lives are different from ours. People will say, "Get a job," but how can you get a job when you can't take a telephone call? You don't have a telephone. You
Right.
Can't give an address. You don't have an address. You don't have clean clothes to go to an interview. You can't get your hair cut. There aren't public showers near, anywhere within access. A lot of people wash in restaurant washrooms. They do the best they can, but there's no way they can actually enter the workforce.
So Jan asked a question in the chat that I think is perfect at this moment, and is that because you've been so close to it, do you see any solution to their plight?
I was hoping I'd find a solution. That was my original intent. I saw that the homeless shelter wasn't serving a purpose for these particular people. And they gave me a lot of reasons. A lot of them had been beat up. Shelters just aren't very pleasant people. They're pleasant places. Some complained of bed bugs. I can't remember what the question was.
Well, no, you actually kind of answered it. That was your original intent, was to find a solution to their plight. But do you think there is one?
I was actually, my brother-in-law and I had intended to open a homeless shelter. He was a financial planner. His wife was in real estate, and we were rather hoping we could do something to help the people on the street. And we even had the assistance of the Ottawa Inner City Ministries, who look after one of the shelters. They offered doctors at no charge, psychiatrists, all that kind of thing, but we couldn't get the money for an actual physical building. So that didn't happen. As far as solutions, it's such an individual situation. A lot of people have trouble filling out applications. They have trouble going to appointments on time. They have trouble making their court appearances. They have trouble even going to their parole hearings, or most of them refuse to go to doctors because they're alcoholic and they don't want to spend more than 48 hours without a drink. Well, actually not even, I'd say maybe 6 hours without a drink. So they try to keep their alcoholism in control and their other addictions, whatever they might be. In Canada, alcoholism and drug addiction are considered diseases. So they're given treatment for them, and they're given a disability allowance. Unfortunately, the allowance isn't great enough for them to pay their rent and buy food, so they pay their rent and beg for food on the street. A solution would be more money, but it's difficult to know how to distribute that money.
Right. I mean, there's going to be people that would benefit and then people that would take advantage of it. So how long did it actually take you once you decided that you were going to write that first Conversations with Street People? How long did it take?
It was about 2 years. And when the publisher approached me, she asked me to send her, she'd been seeing my daily posts on WordPress on my website, Street Sister. I think I called it Gotta Find a Home at first, but I publish posts daily, as I do now, even from 2010, 2011. So when I sent the material to her, she said, well, you've got enough material here for 2 books. So she put out the first one, and I went to book signings and that kind of thing. It was relatively well received. I was able to donate $2,000 to the Ottawa Inner City Ministries, who support the outreach people who walk around and check on the individuals, pass out blankets, pass out water, even socks and underwear, sleeping bags in the wintertime.
Awesome.
So that I considered fairly successful. She went out of business, so my second book I published on my own, since it was all pretty much formatted, and same with the third and fourth.
So there's 4 books in the series at this point.
Yes.
Okay. So I know at many points in your book you have, very detailed exchanges and discussions. They're very personal.
Yes. I'm an empath. I really feel what other people are feeling, and I was very much aware of the fact that these people would detect any kind of insincerity, or I never wore a recording device of any kind, because I would have feared for my life if anybody ever found it. And it was just over a period of, I guess, about 8 years that these people, that I gained their trust, and I found them to be very generous. Sometimes, somebody would say, "You look chilly," and I'd say, "No, I'm okay." And I said, "No, you're chilly. So wear my jacket. You feel better."
Oh.
And they'd offer me drinks. They'd offer me beer. They'd offer me the joint. I wouldn't take it because I had to go back to work. And even food. One time, this fellow, Andre, I think I call him in the book, he said to the group, he says, "We've got a feast here today," and he pulled out a quarter pounder, and he divided it in 4 ways and handed me a quarter. And I said, "Well, no, so somebody else could use that more than I could." But that kind of generosity from people, I just found amazing.
No, it is amazing. And your books are so clearly a work of love and commitment, and that honesty that you were talking about, that transparency really seems to come through. The donations that you've made to the ministries to help, I mean, that's a huge accomplishment. Not everybody can do those kinds of things. So you should be commended for doing that. I want to take a look back in the chat for just a second, because Lydia Tanner made a comment about friends who have relatives who have mental issues and drug problems, and they felt helpless and not knowing how to help them. How do you feel that might be similar to people that are actually living on the street and homeless? Is that like a close step to that path?
Yes, it is. I've talked to many many people on the street who've gone through rehabilitation programs. Some of their families were quite well off and could send them to, I think Vermont was one of the ones that they recommended. It was very expensive. And I think they stayed there 6 months. Actually, I think that the original term was supposed to be 6 months, but then this guy's father said, well, you're not ready yet, stay another 6 months. And he did stay sober for a couple of years, and then he just got back onto the alcohol again. It's a very slippery slope. You know, you get into situations where everybody else is drinking, or you run into hardship where sometimes you need something to help you sleep, or just help take the edge off the feelings you have at the time. A lot of the people have been suicidal at various times, and they see an awful lot of funerals, you know, people dying all the time, people being beaten up on the street, people sleeping on park benches who get beaten up, their teeth kicked out. One was even set on fire. Just horrible things that you, it's so hard to imagine things like that actually happening.
Well, Nani mentions in the window, and maybe this is really good to bring up to everyone that's listening, is that they now have a program called GoFundMe. And GoFundMe campaigns are where people are all too willing to help out all different situations that are more community based, which is what homelessness and street people really has a foundation of community.
Yes. I've never tried that myself, but on my website I had a direct link to Ottawa City Ministries, inner city ministries, where people could donate directly. They didn't have to send money to me; it just went directly to them, and I think that was quite helpful to people.
So you mentioned earlier parole officers. Do you find that many people on the street have some type of history in dealing with the law enforcement, or is it just, you know, they had a problem and they've overcome it? Or
I'd say most, if not all, of them had some dealings with the law. Joy, for example, her parents kicked her out of the house when she was, I think, 14 years old. I think because she got involved with drugs. And then she joined a motorcycle club where she became a drug dealer, and then went to jail for, I think, prostitution, and was in for a while, in and out. And yeah, people were in for drugs mostly. Some people have tried to sell drugs to narcotics officers. Some had been in fights. Some had killed people. I don't think I met anybody who had never had, you know, a bad experience with the law, who didn't have a criminal record. And often it was very sad situations where, you know, they didn't have anything to eat. They didn't have a place to live. They, you know, stole things, stole bicycles, fixed them and sold them. And I can remember one fellow, I can't even remember what name I used to call him, but he was living on a farm with his, I think his grandfather, and he'd collect bicycles. Actually, he'd steal bicycles and then repair them and resell them. And one time the police came around, and he rushed everything out into the back field, and he was riding around the streets, and his father said, why are you riding that particular bicycle? He said, well, this is the one that the police aren't looking for. So, and he was, all of these people, although a lot of them had bad starts in life. This particular fellow was a cordon bleu chef. He worked in a restaurant as a maitre d', made good money at that. And his family died and he lost that job, and just got into other things, mostly illegal. In fact, Joy said that she never had a legal job in her life. I'm just trying to think of some of the other professions. Several of the people had degrees. One fellow had I think a master's degree in agriculture, and others were psychologists, had degrees in psychology. And there was another person who was a cordon bleu chef, who was he was trained to work in the most exclusive restaurants, but being an alcoholic, he simply he couldn't work an 8-hour shift, so
Right.
he just couldn't take being kind of confined, I guess.
So I know that there's 4 books in the series. We've talked about that, and I know that you're a very passionate kind of an artist, both with your writing and your artwork. Are you working on any other projects right now?
I keep writing. There's a couple of fiction books that I've been working on. I'm not particularly happy with them, but I keep correcting them, keep editing them. And there's a book of poetry that I'm putting together now. I expect to publish it sometime later on this year. And I was rather hoping to maybe combine it with my paintings. So it might be something to consider. I'm not sure. I just don't know where I want to take that right now.
Is this still along the lines of the homeless and the street people kind of venue, or is it different?
No. Well, there's a couple of projects I'm working on. A couple of my favorite authors are Raymond Chandler, and the crime noir scene with Maltese Falcon, that kind of thing. And I just got another book by Damon Runyon, who wrote Guys and Dolls, and it's the whole Broadway scene. I love. They just seem so direct and straightforward. So I guess these 2 novels that I've worked on, one actually deals with the setting around on the waterfront with Marlon Brando.
Right.
So I researched the whole waterfront scene at that time, figured out the locations that were talked about in the book, and created characters that I felt would somehow fit into that. And I'm trying to think if I haven't published that. It's about ready for publication. It's called Private Eye. I may have published it. I'm not sure. It's
called Private what? I'm sorry?
Private Eye.
Oh, Private Eye. Okay.
Eugene Leftowitz. And it's as much of a comedy as it is a historical reenactment of those times in the 40s with dock strikes and Jimmy Hoffa and things like that.
There's a couple of other comments that are in the chat room that I really want to call out because I think they're important. And one of them came from Karen Black.
Mm-hmm.
And she states that she thinks some people do look down on the homeless, but as more attention is drawn to the circumstance, that attitude is beginning to change. And I kind of want to camp on to what Jan said, that's a really good point. I think the more awareness, and your books have certainly, at least for me, brought that awareness front and center. When I worked downtown, I came across several of the homeless people and tried to do the best I could to help them on a day-to-day basis. But, it was with bringing food or things like that, but nothing like spending time sitting and talking to them. And I mean, that's just remarkable. Let's see, are there any other questions in the peanut gallery or? No, I think the unanimous situation is that it's a circumstance where, we just need to know that that's another part of our community and do some of what we can. And maybe GoFundMe is the way to go nowadays for some people. And I kind of to shift a little bit because it's getting a little sad for me. I know that you're a member of RRBC and RISA. And how has that experience been during your tenure with both organizations?
I haven't been as active as I should have been. Ronnie keeps reminding me of that. But yes, I've met a great number of other authors and read their books and reviewed their books, and I found it to be a good experience. I tend to be a bit of a, I think well, actually this pandemic has reminded me that I probably like animals more than I like people, and I'm quite content being on my own, being alone. I'm married, and my wife is an artist, so she understands, that I need time to create, and I give her time to create, so that works out well.
That sounds like that's well matched, you guys. That's terrific. So, I know that you're considered a dedicated and loyal member of RRBC, but it took a while for you to get to that place that you just mentioned. What really prompted you to become more involved with the club, other than Nani prompting you?
It just seemed another opportunity to sell my books, and the reason my motivation behind selling my books, of course, is giving money to the homeless. Actually, there's another thing I wanted to mention. You talked about people looking down on the homeless and not knowing what to do. What I used to do is I'd buy meal cards from a local restaurant, Tim Hortons. I'd buy 10 at a time and keep them in my pocket, and also a couple of sheets of bus tickets. And if the person, I'd hand them out. If the person was hungry, it would assure him that he could go there and get a meal, $5 meal. And same with bus tickets. Sometimes people couldn't get to doctor's appointments or parole visitations, or they couldn't get back home. They were downtown. They had to come downtown to earn money, but it would cost them to go back home. So that was one of the things that I found, I guess I was most pleased with overall. I think I did the most good by approaching people in that manner. I was giving them something. It didn't look like a handout. It was just a card.
Yep.
They could buy whatever they wanted with it. At first I had trouble. This is, again, a little bit of a sad story, but I used to bring Joy a breakfast sandwich and tea with cream and 3 sugar. And one time she said, do you mind if I change my order? And I said, oh, fine, sure. So she said, could I have a bagel with cream cheese on it instead? And when I brought it back to her, she said, I've been having trouble with my digestion because when I was a drug dealer, I was stabbed with a sawtooth machete, and it cut up my stomach. So when they stitched me back together, she actually had 2 compartments in her stomach, and sometimes food would come back up on her. It's quite a funny story, actually, when you go all the way back. But she was into selling cocaine, I think, and just met with a bad customer.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure that because she was reconciled, she could tell it and accept it and be funny, but boy, does it sound desperately sad to me.
Yes, she was 47 when she died, and all of that time, well, as I say, since she was 14, excuse me, she'd been on the street in one way or another, in one capacity or another, with a motorcycle gang, as a prostitute. Some of the women had worked as strippers while they could, and
not an easy life.
No.
Sometimes there's no choices. It's not necessarily a choice. So, okay. So what do you do outside of writing and drawing to relax? You're in a beautiful part of the world. So do you take advantage of that?
Yes, I do. My wife and I have a cottage on an island about an hour and a half from where we live. So we go out there whenever we can. My wife works 3 mornings a week, so we have to kind of work around the weather. We just came back a few days ago. We have a power boat, canoe. I built a small cabin. We have about an acre of land, I guess, an acre and a half of land. So it's right in the middle of the trees. It's actually used to be, hundreds of years ago, it was a place where Native Mohawks would, it was their summer hunting ground. So
Nice.
artifacts have been found. I haven't found any myself, but we get the feeling of, spirits being nearby. And we kind of feel that we're guardians of this area, that, we have to respect it. We have to take care of it. And I talked to other people about that, and they said it's very true. Some of the homeless people I've talked to, a lot of them have been First Nations, Aboriginal people, and my first wife's grandmother was Mi'kmaq.
Oh, wow.
First Nation from New Brunswick, and my son, for some reason, is he's slightly psychic, and when he drives through New Brunswick, he can hear drumming, and he thinks that's, well, he can't explain it, but he's a musician too, so drumming comes natural.
Very nice. So before I ask my final question, I want to reach out to the Peanut Gallery. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question of Dennis while we have him? The comments have been great. I think everybody on here is going to be reading your books, and so that is awesome. I'm so glad you could share it. But do we have any questions for John? Don't be shy. Raise your hand. We can unmute
Hi
you.
there, John.
Joy?
No, I'm just dumbfounded. I just have a comment. I lived in Los Angeles area for a while, some years ago. And I used to go, every morning I go to mass, to the Cathedral of the Angels. And I used to walk through a very long stretch of road, very empty. And there was this homeless man at an intersection that always ran out to have a conversation with me. And I will have a conversation, we talk and we laugh. And one day I asked him, I said, why are you always here? He said, because I love being here. I said, well, you're okay. He said, yes, I'm okay, but I just love being out here.
Right.
After a while, I stopped seeing him, and then I left the area. And like you said, these are really nice people. When they talk to you, they don't look like they have any problem at all. This man didn't look like he had any problem to me.
Right.
And I didn't understand why he was living on the street.
Yes, I've always found them to be very sincere, and that shows. You can see it in their eyes. I'm not saying they don't lie to people, but I didn't. Actually, that's one thing that they are very much against. Nobody in the street family is allowed to lie to each other. They can lie to people on the street, when they're begging for money, but none of them lie to each other. Everybody has each other's back. Everybody supports one another. If it's a place to sleep or something to eat, or if it's a little bit of money, they're just very good people.
Yeah.
And I guess they've just been reduced to the most basic level. So the only place they can go is up.
Yeah.
Yep, there's a code of honor there, I guess.
Yes, very much.
So I'm sorry, does anyone have a question for Dennis, since I was reading and looking at the wrong time? Oh, Nadia's comment's pretty good. There's a movie called The Family That Prays, or something like that, with Tyler Perry. Does anyone know that exact name?
Yeah.
Of that movie?
By Tyler Perry, yes, I've seen the movie.
I've seen some of his movies, but I don't recognize that particular one.
Anyways, it's about a homeless guy who comes into a restaurant every day, and the owner has clean clothes for him and allows him to wash up in the back of a restaurant.
Yeah. I've seen that movie.
Okay, so that's not going to be nearly as good as reading Dennis's book. So Dennis, I have one last question for you, and that is, what writing or life advice can you share with the people that are listening to this?
The only thing I can think of is, I think just try to open your heart to experience. the experience of other people or your situation. I write a lot about nature. I write about well, my friends and just my experiences at our cabin, at different places, about the people sometimes about homeless people. But just be open all the time, be present, and be accepting of what comes your way.
I think that's awesome advice, Dennis, and I really appreciate it. I can see we're very close to being out of time, and I want to thank you for visiting with us today and honoring me by chatting with me and helping make this Eyes on the Book an extra special show. So thank you. I hope everyone gets these books and really thinks about the community. But before we go, I want to suggest 2 more books that everyone should keep their eyes on. The first one is a new short story called Breathless by Yvette Clara. It's a great little short story. The other one is The Water Maiden by Raymond M. Hall, which is now on my list. So you might want to check out both of those titles in the RRBC library catalog, and pick them up on Amazon or any other online retailer where books are sold legally. If you miss a live show, you can always find each and every episode in the archives. I'm your host, Rox Berkey. Thank you for joining us today for another segment of Rave Waves, where all things literary are our passion. Until next time, keep reading and keep your eyes on today's books. Thank you. Stay safe and stay home.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Rox.